I can still hear it, his laughter, his friend's laughter, and then that one sentence that pierced through my chest like an arrow. Honestly, Jesse was never this dramatic. I stood there, frozen by the kitchen doorway, coffee mug trembling in my hand, something inside me breaking in a way it had never broken before. That was Benson, my fiancé, my everything, sitting in the living room with his college friends, and Jesse's name kept coming up. Jesse, his ex, the guy Benson always called ancient history, but the smile on his face right now didn't look ancient at all. It looked fresh, it looked fond. You know what I mean, right? Benson said, taking a sip of his beer, leaning back like he owned the world. Jesse never sweated the small stuff. He was so chill about everything. But Marco, he let out this long, theatrical sigh. Like talking about me exhausted him. Marco finds problems in literally everything. I thought maybe he'd glance over. Maybe he'd realize I was standing right there, within earshot. But no. His friends laughed. That easy, careless kind of laughter that comes when you're making fun of someone who isn't there to defend themselves. Except I was there, and Benson laughed too. That comfortable laugh that said he'd forgotten I existed. Or worse, that he just didn't care. I walked back to the bedroom, each step heavier than the last. I set the coffee mug down on the bedside table, my hands shaking so badly I almost knocked it over. We'd spent years together. Years. We'd made plans, talked about the future, picked out engagement rings just a few months ago. And now this? I'd become the punchline to his stories, the unfavorable comparison to the guy who came before me. Later that night, Benson came to bed like nothing had happened. He had that same casual smile plastered on his face. "Hey babe. I'm B." I just nodded, turning to face the wall. "What's wrong? You okay?" he asked. But his voice had that autopilot quality to it. He wasn't really asking because he cared. He was asking because that's what you're supposed to do. "Yeah," I said, my voice flat and hollow. Perfectly fine, but I wasn't fine. Not even close. And maybe for the first time I understood that Benson wasn't fine either. Our relationship wasn't fine. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, Benson's words replaying in my head on an endless loop. How many times had I brushed this off before? How many times had I convinced myself that he's just joking, or he doesn't mean it like that? The answer hit me hard, too many times. Way too many. I thought about last month when I'd planned that romantic dinner at home. I'd gone all out, candles, his favorite pasta dish from scratch, even that expensive wine he liked. He'd shown up an hour late, barely apologized, and when I looked disappointed he'd said, "Jesse never made such a big deal out of these things." I'd laughed it off then, swallowed the hurt, told myself I was being too sensitive. 2 weeks ago, at his company event, he'd barely introduced me to his colleagues. Just a quick, "Oh yeah, this is Marco," before turning back to his conversation. I'd stood there like a prop, invisible. I knew from stories that when Jesse used to attend those events, Benson would introduce him with pride, with excitement. Me? I was just there. Optional. Forgettable. Even our engagement had felt off, looking back now with clear eyes. When he'd proposed, I'd been over the moon. But his friends' reactions had been lukewarm at best. Derek had said, "About time, man," but there was something in his tone that didn't sit right. Raiden had just clapped him on the back and changed the subject. Nobody seemed genuinely happy for us. I rolled over, careful not to wake Benson, and stared at the engagement ring on my finger. The metal felt heavy suddenly, like it was weighing me down instead of lifting me up. When had I become so small in this relationship? When had I started accepting crumbs and calling it love? The worst part wasn't even the comparison to Jesse. It was the realization that Benson didn't see me. He saw someone he could mold into whatever he needed at the moment. Someone who wouldn't complain, who'd always be there, who'd shrink themselves to fit into the spaces Jesse had left behind. I remembered our third date, when Benson had told me about his breakup with Jesse. "It just didn't work out," he'd said, seeming genuinely sad. "But I've moved on. I'm ready for something real now." I'd believed him. I'd thought I was that something real. But lying here in the dark, I wondered if he'd ever really let Jesse go, or if I'd just been a convenient replacement he could criticize for not being identical to the original. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification from Instagram. Benson had posted a photo from tonight, him and his friends raising their beers, all smiles. The caption read, "Good times with the boys." Some things never change. I wasn't in the photo. He hadn't even mentioned I was home. It was like I didn't exist outside of these four walls, outside of the role I played when he needed someone to come home to. I set the phone down and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, though that was there too. It was more like clarity. That awful sharp clarity that comes when you finally see the truth you've been avoiding. This wasn't love. This was convenience. This was Benson wanting the security of a relationship without actually investing in one. And I'd let it happen because I'd been so desperate to be chosen, to be enough, that I'd accepted being treated like I was neither. Morning light started creeping through the curtains, gray and cold. Benson was still asleep, peaceful and unbothered. Why wouldn't he be? In his world, everything was fine. He had a partner who didn't push back, who absorbed every careless comment, who'd convinced himself that being compared unfavorably to an ex was just part of the deal. But something had changed in me overnight. That switch in my brain that had been stuck in the accept everything position had finally flipped. I didn't have answers yet. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep being the person Benson settled for while he held on to the ghost of someone else. As I watched him sleep, I felt the strangest mix of emotions. Sadness for what I thought we had, anger at how long I'd let this go on. But underneath it all, there was something else. Something that felt almost like relief. Because pretending was exhausting and maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to stop. The next morning arrived with a heaviness I couldn't shake. I woke before Benson, which was unusual. He was always the early riser, the one who had his routine down to a science. But today I found myself awake at dawn, staring at the man beside me like he was a stranger. In some ways, maybe he always had been. When he finally stirred, he went through his morning routine like clockwork. I watched him from the bed as he stood in front of the mirror, fastening his watch. That watch. My stomach twisted when I recognized it, the silver one with the blue face. Jesse had given it to him for his birthday 2 years ago, back when they were still together. Benson wore it every single day. How had I never noticed before? Or had I noticed and just chosen not to see? I got up and headed to the kitchen, needing something to do with my hands. "Want breakfast?" I called out, already pulling eggs from the fridge. "Nah. I'll grab something out," he said, appearing in the kitchen doorway as he adjusted his collar. "Meeting Derek and Radin for lunch anyway." Derek and Radin. The same friends who'd spent last night singing Jesse's praises. "Sure," I said quietly, cracking eggs into the pan. "Just for me. Always just for me." Benson paused, studying me with a slight frown. "You've been weird since last night. What's going on?" Weird. That's what he called it when I wasn't performing my usual role of the agreeable partner. "Nothing's going on, Benson," I said, forcing something that might have resembled a smile. "I'm always fine, aren't I?" He didn't catch the edge in my voice. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. "All right. Well, I'll see you tonight. Love you." The words came out automatically like a recording. I didn't say them back. He didn't notice. After the door closed behind him, I stood in the kitchen with my barely touched breakfast, and it was like a dam had broken. Suddenly, I was seeing everything. All the moments I'd filed away as insignificant. All the red flags I'd painted green in my mind. 3 months ago, when we'd gone to that gallery opening he'd been excited about, he'd talked to everyone there, animated and engaged, while I'd followed behind like a shadow. When someone had asked who I was, he'd said, "Oh, just a friend," then laughed it off later as a joke. I was being ironic, he'd said. Obviously they knew, but they hadn't known. And it hadn't been ironic. 6 months before that, when I'd suggested we take a trip together, just the two of us, somewhere we'd never been, he'd shot it down immediately. "That sounds expensive for what it is," he'd said. Then 2 weeks later, I'd overheard him telling Derek about the weekend trip he and Jesse used to take to that cabin upstate. "Best weekends of my life," he'd said, voice full of nostalgia. We'd been together for over a year at that point, and he'd never once suggested we make our own best weekend. I picked up my phone, scrolling through our text history. It was painfully one-sided. My messages were full of questions about his day, suggestions for things we could do together, little observations I wanted to share with him. His responses were brief, functional, cool, can't, busy. Maybe later. Looking at it now, it read like a conversation between a customer service representative and an overly enthusiastic client. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from him. Benson, running late. Probably won't make it home for dinner. Order something. No apology. No, I'll make it up to you. Just a statement of fact, like he was updating me on the weather. I stared at the message for a long time, and here's what shocked me. I felt nothing. No disappointment. No hurt. No anger. Just nothing. And somehow that emptiness was more terrifying than any emotion would have been. When had I stopped caring? Or had I finally just stopped pretending to care about someone who clearly didn't care about me? I didn't reply to his text. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I made plans that had nothing to do with Benson. I called my friend Sarah, someone I'd been neglecting because Benson always had some comment about her being too much, or our hangouts being excessive. We made plans for coffee tomorrow. Then I texted my brother, who I'd been meaning to visit. He was surprised to hear from me. Everything okay? He'd asked. The fact that he felt the need to ask that said everything about how isolated I'd become. That evening, I made myself a proper dinner. Not the sad, rushed meals I'd been eating lately, but something I actually enjoyed. I set the table for one, poured myself a glass of wine, put on music Benson always complained was too loud, and sat there in the quiet eating slowly, tasting everything. It was in that moment, sitting alone in the apartment we shared, that I realized I'd been alone for much longer than just tonight. Benson's physical presence had never really meant companionship. I'd been keeping myself company all along, just with the added burden of someone else's indifference weighing me down. When he finally came home around 10, I was reading on the couch. He looked tired, a little drunk, smelling like beer and cologne that was too strong. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys on the counter with a clatter. "You eaten?" "Hours ago," I said, not looking up from my book. "Cool." He headed toward the bedroom, then paused. "You mad about something?" The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Mad about something. Like there was one specific thing I could point to, one isolated incident that had brought us here. How could I explain that it wasn't about being mad? It was about waking up from a dream I'd been forcing myself to stay in. "No, Benson," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "I'm not mad." "Good," he said, misunderstanding completely. "'Cause I'm too tired for drama tonight." Drama. That word again. As if having feelings, having expectations, having any kind of emotional response to being treated like an afterthought was dramatic. He disappeared into the bedroom, and I heard the shower start a minute later. I sat there with my book, not really reading anymore, just staring at the words on the page. They blurred together, meaningless. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start making changes. Small ones at first. I'd stop waiting for him to notice me. I'd stop shrinking myself to fit into the shape he wanted. I'd stop accepting maybe and later as answers to reasonable requests for basic partnership. Tomorrow I would start choosing myself. But tonight, just for tonight, I let myself sit with the sadness of it all. The death of what I'd hoped we could be. The mourning of time I couldn't get back. The grief of loving someone who'd never really seen me at all. 3 days passed in this strange new limbo. Benson and I existed in the same space but lived separate lives. Like roommates who barely knew each other. He didn't seem to notice the shift, or if he did, he didn't care enough to address it. I'd stopped initiating conversation. Stopped asking about his day. Stopped trying. On Thursday afternoon, my phone lit up with a message that caught me off guard. "Benson, can we meet at Corner Cafe tonight? Around 6? Need to talk." My heart did this uncomfortable jump. Benson wasn't the "we need to talk" type. He was the ignore problems until they disappear type. This was new territory and I wasn't sure what it meant. Me. Okay. I arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee and chose a table in the corner where I could see the entrance. My hands were unsteady as I wrapped them around the warm cup. What was he going to say? Had he finally noticed the distance? Was this the beginning of the end? Or was he going to try to fix something he didn't even realize was broken? The cafe door opened, and I looked up expectantly. But it wasn't Benson. A guy walked in, tall with an athletic build, wearing a brown leather jacket that looked worn in all the right ways. He had this presence about him, confident but not arrogant, sharp jawline, kind eyes the color of honey, dark hair slightly messy like he'd been running his hands through it. He approached the counter, ordered something in a voice that was warm and genuine, thanked the barista by name. As he turned to wait for his drink, our eyes met. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Maybe less. But in that brief moment, something happened that I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't attraction, or not just attraction. It was more like recognition, like seeing someone and thinking, oh, there are still people in the world who look at other people like they matter. He smiled. Small, polite, the kind of smile you give a stranger when you accidentally make eye contact. Then he collected his coffee and settled at a table across the room, pulling out a laptop. I should have looked away, should have gone back to watching the door for Benson. But I found myself glancing over, noticing small things. The way he seemed completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. The way he'd occasionally pause, stare out the window thinking. There was something peaceful about him, something settled. 20 minutes later, Benson finally showed up. No apology for being late, just mild irritation creasing his forehead. Traffic was insane. You wouldn't believe it. Right, I said softly. I'd stopped believing his excuses somewhere around the 100th time I'd heard them. He sat down, didn't ask if I wanted anything else to drink, didn't really look at me properly, just launched right in. Look, Marco, I've been thinking. I feel like you've been making things harder than they need to be lately. Making things harder. Not I've noticed you seem unhappy or is something wrong. Just an accusation dressed up as an observation. Harder how? I kept my voice level, curious where this was going. You're just so sensitive about everything. Like you take everything personally. He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely frustrated. Jesse never did that. He understood that life isn't perfect, that people make jokes, that not everything is some deep, meaningful statement. There it was again. Jesse. The gold standard I'd apparently been failing to meet. I set my coffee cup down very carefully on the table. My hands wanted to shake, wanted to throw something, but I kept them steady through sheer force of will. Can you stop comparing me to your ex? Benson blinked, clearly surprised by my directness. I'm not comparing. You are, I interrupted, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. Clearer. You do it constantly, in front of your friends. Here, right now. Every single time I don't D, you want me to. You hold Jesse up like some perfect example of how I should be. That's not, I'm just saying he had a different perspective. No, Benson. I leaned forward, making sure he couldn't avoid my eyes this way. You're saying he was better. That he was easier. That I'm the problem because I actually expect you to treat me like I matter. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the guy in the brown jacket glance our way. He quickly looked back at his laptop, but there was something in his expression, concern maybe, or recognition of an uncomfortable situation. Benson's face had gone through several shades of emotion. Surprise, defensiveness, and now something that might have been guilt. Marco, come on. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? The question hung in the air between us, genuine and waiting. Silence. He opened his mouth, closed it again, tried once more. I think you're overreacting. And there it was. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement, just more dismissal. Something crystallized in that moment. I'd spent so long trying to be understanding, trying to see his side, trying to be less dramatic and more chill like the ghost of Jesse he carried around. But understanding was supposed to go both ways, wasn't it? When had Benson ever tried to understand me? I need some air, I said, standing up and reaching for my wallet. We're not done talking, Benson said, a note of authority in his voice that set my teeth on edge. Actually, I think we are. For now. I put a $10 bill on the table for my coffee. You wanted to tell me I'm too much. Message received. Now you need to figure out what you actually want from this relationship because I'm not sure you even know anymore. That's not fair, isn't it? I met his eyes, really looked at him. When's the last time you asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer? When's the last time you planned something nice for us? When's the last time you made me feel like you chose me, Benson? Not like you settled for me. Not like I was convenient, but like you actively chose me. He didn't have an answer. The lack of one was answer enough. I walked out of that cafe, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The evening air hit my face, cool and sobering. Behind me I could hear Benson calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I just kept walking. I'd always thought that standing up for yourself would feel triumphant, powerful, but this didn't feel like winning. It felt like finally stopping a losing game. It felt like admitting to myself what I'd known for a while now, that I deserved better than someone who kept score against a memory. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Benson. I didn't Instead, I just walked, letting the city noise wash over me. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. The tightness in my chest that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing it. It was loosening. Just a little. This wasn't the end of the story. But maybe finally it was the beginning of mine. The next 2 weeks existed in this strange space between ending and not quite ended. Benson and I shared the same apartment, but we might as well have been strangers passing in a hotel hallway. He carried on like nothing had shifted, his routine unchanged, his demeanor as casual as ever, but I wasn't the same person anymore. I'd started observing instead of participating, noticing instead of excusing. When he came home late, I didn't wait up anymore. I'd be deep in a book or halfway through a series I'd been wanting to watch. When I heard him on the phone with his friends, laughing about something Jesse used to do, I'd slip in my headphones and lose myself in music. And when he'd ask, "Why are you being so quiet lately?" I'd just shrug and say, "Just tired." But it wasn't tiredness. It was awareness. It was the slow, deliberate process of untangling myself from someone who'd never really held on to me in the first place. I was changing, finding pieces of myself I'd tucked away to make room for his comfort. The Marco who used to anxiously check his phone every 20 minutes to see if Benson had texted back, he was fading. In his place was someone calmer, someone who didn't need constant validation from a person who'd never really offered it. On Thursday afternoon, I found myself near that cafe again. I hadn't planned it, or maybe I had and just didn't want to admit it to myself. Something about that place felt different now, like it represented a possibility I hadn't considered before, the possibility that I could exist outside of Benson's shadow. I decided to go in, just for coffee, just to sit somewhere that felt neutral, untainted by history. I was waiting at the counter when I heard a voice behind me. "Marco, right?" I turned around and felt my pulse quicken. It was him, the guy from last time, the one with the brown leather jacket. Today he wore a simple black shirt and jeans, holding a coffee cup, that same genuine warmth in his expression. "Yeah," I said, genuinely surprised. "How did you know my name?" "Last time you were here," he said with an easy smile. "Your fiancé used it. I have a good memory for names. Hope that's not creepy." "No, it's fine," I said, and meant it. There was something disarming about his honesty. "I'm sorry I didn't catch yours." "Tanner," he said, extending his hand. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, the kind that suggested confidence without needing to prove anything. "Nice to officially meet you. Here alone?" he asked casually as I collected my coffee. "Yeah, just needed to clear my head." "I get that. Mind if I join you? Or if you'd rather have space?" "I totally understand." The old me would have politely declined, worried about what it might mean, what Benson might think if he somehow found out. But that version of me was disappearing. Sure, why not? We settled at a table by the window and conversation flowed in a way I hadn't experienced in months. Tanner told me he was a freelance photographer, traveling for work more often than not, capturing everything from corporate events to intimate weddings. I talked about my marketing job, the projects I was working on, the parts of it I actually enjoyed versus the parts I just tolerated. What struck me most was how he listened. Really listened. He made eye contact, asked follow-up questions, remembered details from things I'd said 5 minutes earlier. It was such a stark contrast to Benson's distracted nods and non-committal grunts that I almost didn't know how to handle it. "You're engaged, right?" Tanner asked, noticing the ring I still wore out of habit more than commitment. I looked down at it, the metal feeling heavier than it ever had before. "It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are," he said, not pushing, just acknowledging. "What about you? Anyone special?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Not currently. My last relationship ended about a year ago. We wanted different things, different futures. It hurt at the time, but looking back it was the healthiest ending we could have had. Since then I've been focusing on myself, figuring out what I actually want instead of just going along with what seems expected." His words resonated in a way that made my chest tight. That's exactly what I'd been doing. going along, bending, adjusting, all to fit into a relationship that had never really fit me. We talked for over an hour, touching on everything from childhood dreams to adult realities, from the feeling of losing yourself in someone else, to the terrifying freedom of finding yourself again. When I finally checked my phone and realized how much time had passed, I felt almost guilty for enjoying myself this much. I should probably head out, I said, standing reluctantly. This was nice, Tanner said, standing as well. If you ever want to grab coffee again or just talk, I'm usually here Thursday afternoons and weekend mornings. I smiled, and it felt genuine in a way my smiles hadn't felt in weeks. I'll keep that in mind. When I got home, Benson was in his usual spot on the couch, eyes glued to the television, barely registering my entrance. Where were you? He asked, tone flat, not even looking away from the screen. Out, had coffee, I said simply. By yourself? Yeah. He made a non-committal sound and turned back to his show. No further questions, no real interest, just checkbox concern. The bare minimum required to maintain the illusion of caring. I went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it all. The relief of being heard by someone, the sadness of realizing how long it had been since Benson really saw me, the emerging hope that maybe there was something better waiting if I was brave enough to reach for it. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about the distance growing between us. I didn't feel the need to bridge the gap, to try harder, to be better, because the truth was becoming clearer with each passing day. This relationship wasn't failing because I wasn't enough. It was failing because Benson had never really wanted me. He'd wanted the idea of me, the convenience of me, someone to fill a space Jesse had left behind. And I deserved more than being someone's placeholder. That night, as Benson slept soundly beside me, completely unaware of the seismic shift happening in my heart, I made a decision. Not a rash one, not an emotional one, but a clear-eyed, sober assessment of what I needed to do. I needed to leave, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, completely. I needed to choose myself for once, even if it meant walking away from years of history, from the safety of the known, from the person I'd thought I'd spend my life with. It wasn't going to be easy. It was probably going to hurt like hell. But staying, continuing to shrink myself, to accept less than I deserved, to live in the shadow of someone who'd never really been mine to compete with, that would hurt more. So I decided, not tomorrow, not next week, but soon, very soon, I would choose peace. I would choose myself. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that decision didn't scare me. It freed me. Benson noticed. It took him nearly a week, but he finally caught on that something fundamental had shifted. I'd become distant in a way that even his considerable ability to ignore problems couldn't overlook anymore. The realization seemed to hit him on a Friday evening when I declined his suggestion to order our usual pizza and watch a movie. Let's go out to dinner, he said, putting actual effort into his smile. Somewhere nice. You pick the place. I have work to finish, I said, not looking up from my laptop. Tomorrow then? Saturday night. We haven't done anything together in forever. I finally met his eyes, seeing something there I hadn't seen in months. Actual concern, or maybe just fear that his comfortable arrangement was coming apart. We need to have a real conversation, Benson. His expression shifted immediately, defensive walls going up. A conversation about what? I closed my laptop slowly, deliberately. About us. About what this relationship has become. If this is still about the Jesse thing, I already said I was just joking. This isn't about Jesse. I interrupted, keeping my voice level despite the emotions churning inside me. This is about how you make me feel every single day. Small. Insufficient. Like I'm Manson auditioning for a role I'm never quite right for. I never said, you don't have to say it, Benson. You show it. Every time you compare me to him in front of your friends. Every time you dismiss my feelings as being too dramatic. Every time you put me last on your list of priorities. I've spent months trying to prove I'm enough, and I'm exhausted. I'm done trying to be someone I'm not just to meet a standard you won't even articulate. For the first time since I'd known him, Benson looked genuinely speechless. His mouth opened and closed, searching for the right comeback, the perfect excuse, but nothing came. I pulled off the engagement ring, feeling its absence even before it left my finger. I set it carefully on the coffee table between us. The small sound it made somehow deafening in the silence. Keep this, I said, my voice steady with a finality I hadn't known I possessed. "I need time to think." "We both do." "Marco, wait." Now there was panic in his voice. Real emotion breaking through for the first time in recent memory. "You're not thinking clearly. Don't make a decision you'll regret." "I'm not," I said, standing and heading toward the bedroom. "For the first time in a long time, I'm thinking perfectly clearly." "That's exactly the problem." I pulled out my duffel bag from the closet and started packing essentials. Benson appeared in the doorway, watching with an expression caught between confusion and desperation. "Where are you going?" "Derek offered his guest room if I ever needed it." "I'm taking him up on that." "This is ridiculous. You're overreacting to—" "No, Benson," I said, zipping the bag and facing him. "This is clarity. This is me finally seeing that I deserve someone who doesn't treat me like a consolation prize. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I have to earn basic respect and consideration." I moved past him, bag in hand, and he didn't try to physically stop me. He just stood there, looking lost in a way I'd never seen before. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to fall back into old patterns of putting his feelings before my own. But I'd done that for too long already. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, saw Tanner's name on the screen. "Tanner. Hey, coffee tomorrow. If you're free." I allowed myself a small smile. The first genuine one I'd felt all evening. "Me? Yeah. I'd really like that." I looked back one last time. Benson stood in the hallway, watching me leave, probably still not fully understanding how we'd arrived at this moment. But I understood. I understood perfectly, and that's why I didn't turn back. Why I walked out that door, got in my car, and drove away without a single glance in the rearview mirror. Because sometimes loving yourself means walking away from someone who's never gonna love you the way you deserve. Sometimes it means choosing the unknown over the familiar. Sometimes it means being brave enough to believe that peace is possible, even when it requires leaving everything comfortable behind. Derek's apartment was across town, and the drive gave me time to process what I'd just done. Part of me expected to feel regret, to want to turn around and take it all back. But as the miles passed, all I felt was lighter. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Derek answered the door before I could knock, like he'd been waiting. Maybe he had been. He took one look at me, at the bag in my hand, and just nodded. "Guest room's all yours," he said. "No questions, no judgment. Just rest." "Thank you," I managed, voice thick with emotions I'd been holding back. "We've all been where you are," he said quietly. "That moment when you finally choose yourself. It's terrifying and liberating all at once. You're going to be okay, Marco. Better than—" I wanted to believe him. Standing there in his doorway, bag in hand, engagement called off, future uncertain. I wanted desperately to believe that this pain was temporary, that clarity would lead to healing, that choosing myself was the right decision even when it felt like the hardest one I'd ever made. That night, lying in Derek's guest bed, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, I felt the full weight of what I'd done. The ending of a relationship, yes. But more than that, the ending of a version of myself who'd thought love meant sacrificing who you are. My phone lit up one more time before I turned it off for the night. Another message from Benson. Probably the 10th one since I'd left. "Benson, I can change. Just come home and we'll talk about this. Please." I didn't respond, because talking had never been our problem. Our problem was that Benson had never really listened, and I'd never really demanded that he should. But I was listening to myself now, and what I heard was clear. I deserved better. I deserved someone who chose me first, not someone who only noticed me when I was walking away. Tomorrow I'd meet Tanner for coffee. Tomorrow I'd start figuring out what came next. Tomorrow I'd begin the work of rebuilding myself. But tonight, I just let myself feel it all. The grief, the relief, the fear, the hope. All of it, because feeling it meant I was finally truly alive again. Derek's guest room became my sanctuary. Small but comfortable, it was the first space in years that was truly mine. No compromises, no adjustments, no walking on eggshells around someone else's mood. The first night was strange, lying there in the quiet, but it was a good kind of strange. Peaceful. The next morning I met Tanner at the cafe. The same cafe where everything had started to crystallize, where I'd first realized that conversations could feel effortless, that being heard was supposed to be the baseline, not the exception. We both knew this wasn't just casual coffee between acquaintances. There was an understanding between us, unspoken but clear. You did the right thing, Tanner said after I'd told him everything. The confrontation, the ring on the table, walking out. I keep waiting to feel sure about that, I admitted, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup. We were together for years. We'd planned a whole future. And now it's just, fear doesn't mean you made the wrong choice, Tanner said, leaning forward with that same genuine attention I was starting to crave. It means you're doing something real. Something that matters. You're choosing yourself, and that's never easy. But it's always worth it. His words settled over me like a warm blanket. We talked for hours that morning. About everything and nothing. About the dreams we'd abandoned to fit into relationships that didn't fit us. About the terror of starting over. About the strange relief that comes with finally stopping the performance. I don't want you to think this is a rebound situation, I said at one point, needing to be honest. I'm a mess right now. I don't even know who I am outside of that relationship. I'm not looking at this as a rebound. Tanner replied, his voice serious but kind. But I also don't want you to lose yourself again. Even for me. You need to heal first, Marco. Figure out who you are, what you want. And I'm willing to wait while you do that. No pressure, no expectations. That understanding, that patience was something I'd never experienced before. Benson had always needed me to be a certain way, to fit a specific mold. Tanner was offering me space to just. The following month unfolded slowly. Benson called, texted, showed up at Derek's apartment twice. Each time his message was the same. He could change. He'd go to therapy, he'd work on himself. Just give him another chance. But I held firm. Not because I didn't believe he could change. Maybe he could. Maybe he would. But because I'd finally understood that this wasn't about him changing. It was about me refusing to shrink anymore. I spent time reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. Sarah and I had lunch every week, and she kept saying how different I seemed, how much more present. My brother and I started a tradition of Sunday phone calls. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, photography, hiking, actually cooking meals I enjoyed instead of just making what Benson preferred. Tanner and I saw each other regularly, but we kept it simple. Coffee dates, walks in the park, long conversations that stretched into evening. No rushing, no defining, just getting to know each other without the weight of expectations. 6 weeks after I'd walked out, Benson showed up at Derek's place one final time. I agreed to talk to him on the front porch, neutral territory. I've started therapy, he said, and I could see he meant it. There were dark circles under his eyes, a vulnerability in his expression I'd rarely seen. I'm working on understanding why I did what I did. The comparisons, the dismissiveness, all of that's good, Benson. I'm glad you're doing that work. Can we try again? I know I messed up, but I'm different now. I can prove it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something unexpected. Compassion without attachment. I could care about his growth without needing to be part of it. You should change for yourself, not for me, I said gently. And I need to keep choosing myself, which means not going back to something that required me to be less than I am. We both deserve partners who bring out the best in us naturally, not people we have to work this hard to be compatible with. Tears welled in his eyes, but he nodded slowly. I really did love you, you know. I just didn't know how to show it. I believe you, I said, and I did. But love isn't enough when respect and consideration aren't there too. Be happy, Marco, he said finally, his voice breaking. I really do want that for you. You too, Benson. Genuinely. He walked away, and this time I knew it was truly over. No more late-night texts. No more promises to change. No more hoping things would be different. Just closure. Clean and complete. 2 months after that conversation, Tanner and I made our relationship official. It was nothing like what I'd had with Benson. It was slower, more deliberate, built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than need and habit. When Tanner introduced me to his friends, he said simply, "This is Marco. He's incredible. No qualifications. No comparisons to anyone who came before. No footnotes. Just acknowledgement of who I was, and when I introduced him to my people, I felt proud rather than anxious. Proud of him, yes, but more importantly, proud of myself for having the courage to walk away from something that diminished me and towards something that celebrated me. 6 months in, we were having dinner at my new apartment. I'd moved out of Derek's place and found my own space when Tanner said something that made me stop mid-bite. "You know what I love most about us?" he asked. "You never have to perform. You're just you. And that's more than enough." Enough. That word that had haunted me for so long, that I'd chased desperately in my relationship with Benson, had finally found its home. Not because Tanner gave it to me, but because I'd learned to give it to myself first. I thought about the Marco who'd stood in that kitchen months ago, hearing himself compared to someone else, feeling his heart break in real time. I thought about how far I'd come from that moment, not just in distance, but in understanding. Choosing myself hadn't been about being selfish. It had been about recognizing that I couldn't pour from an empty cup, that accepting less than I deserved only taught people how to give me less. That peace wasn't something to chase in someone else but something to cultivate within myself. Benson had taught me what I didn't want. Tanner was showing me what was possible. But the real lesson, the one that mattered most, I'd taught myself that the most important love story was the one I had with myself, and everything else was just an extension of that. I was finally free, finally whole, finally beautifully completely enough, just as I was.